everyone. Thanks for checking out the Indy Handshake Wrestling Podcast. My name is Paul Ponte, and I'm here today with Battle King Dave Dutra.
What's up, everybody? Thanks for having me, Paul.
Absolutely. I'm so stoked to have you on. Fresh off of you coming off of AEW Dark, facing off against Ricky Starks, which was awesome. Although the guy who did the Titantron thing needs to know how to spell check his work, but that's okay.
Yeah, Datura.
Yeah. Adding some extra syllables there.
You know, that's not the first time that my name has been misspelled exactly like that.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. One time I wrestled Kushida, and some Japanese press wrote my name out as Datura, so Datura. And I think it's because, for whatever reason, Dutra is hard for them to pronounce. So they spelled it as they would pronounce it. So if you say like Dave Dutra, it sort of sounds like that. So I thought, I don't know, it was sort of funny. I saw how I watched the Dark and I saw that and I sort of chuckled a little bit, but it is what it is. I thought it was pretty cool that they took the time to put a little graphic together like that. So
yeah, well, you got to think like, remember, or like anytime you see him on Raw or SmackDown, especially back in the day, like whenever they started off with someone who wasn't signed, they would just be in the ring.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They wouldn't even show an entrance. You'd just be there. It's like,
right. And best case scenario, you get like your name with like this really generic, like bluish green, like with little things spinning around. It's like it's some like out of the box, like here you've just learned how to do motion graphics, and you just put it on there. But they actually took the time to draw this like warrior Viking head looking thing, and so for that, I thought that was pretty cool.
I really like that AEW does that with their unsigned talent. Like WWE is always like, okay, well, you know, you're Joe Jackson, and here's your wear some colorful tights, be in the ring. Yeah. You're like, you're not allowed to really have a gimmick. You're like, okay, I guess.
I think they understand where we're coming from as, you know, local unsigned talent that are trying to get their names out there, and you know, we know our role there, right? And they know why they need to use us. But at the same time, they're like, you know, let's give these guys a little bit of a rub. They can use the names that they've established. And in some cases, some of the guys who get on there already are established in some sense in the indies, right? So I think it's a win-win for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go ahead and let's go back in time now to the start of you discovering the world of independent pro wrestling. How did you switch off from, you know, watching the big leagues, quote unquote, to finding out what indie wrestling is?
I think I found out what indie wrestling was the same way I think many people did, and at least people in California, and I'm sure many of the guests that have been on your podcast, I found out from Beyond the Mat. So I mean, at that time in the late 90s, it was starting there were a lot of things coming out that were like pulling the curtain behind the business a little bit. And as a teenager during that time, it was sort of like a wow moment. So whether it was like the secrets of pro wrestling specials on NBC, or in this case, Beyond the Mats, where you get Wrestling with Shadows was another one, where you get this behind the scenes into the business. Anytime something like that came up, I looked everywhere and scoured, and I found out Beyond the Mat was something that was limited release in theaters, and I never got to see it in theaters, which really made me mad. But the moment it got released on DVD or VHS, I think is the first time I saw it. I rented that, was looking forward to all the WWF content, but had no idea, you know, because I think it pretty much opened more so with the APW stuff. So you got Tony Jones and Michael Modest, and you get to watch them go to the Arco Arena and do their dark matches. And that just sort of blew my mind. And they showed all the little clips of the garage and how to train to be a wrestler. So that opened up my eyes and went, okay, so there really are places where you go before the big leagues, and you go and you learn and you train and et cetera. So,
yeah, I remember because every once in a while, WCW in the late 90s would advertise the WCW power plant. And I always thought, oh, so that must just be how it works. Like you just go and then that's the only way to do it. Oh, you know, so weird. So I wanted to talk to you a bit about the Pro Wrestling Iron tryout that you had. So I first met you recently at a big time wrestling show that you were at. At the time, I had no idea that me and you were at the same pro wrestling iron tryout together.
Yeah.
that like blew my mind.
It's been, Paul. That's how long it's been.
Yeah. That blows my mind. So, how'd you hear about the PWI trial? What was that experience like for you?
Sure. So I dabbled quite a bit in backyard wrestling before my time as a pro wrestler, or even before my time at Iron. I ran my own like backyard promotion. And I met lots of, friends that I still have to this day through all of that. This is all in San Jose. And over time, like, I think this was like 2002 ish. I was graduating high school. My dad was actually positioning himself to move out of San Jose, which is where we did all of our backyard shows. And he was going up to Rockland up here past Sacramento. So we basically had to end everything we were doing. So as a backyard wrestler who's looking for places to wrestle, the network that we of kids that we essentially had established, we knew people who knew people. And I basically, through AOL and just mutual friends, met Nick Aragon, who was doing a lot of volunteer work for Roland Alexander at the garage. He would do a lot, I think, of the DVD production, filming, whatnot. And he can correct us if I'm wrong on this, but I believe he had some kind of a working agreement with Roland that if he did all this volunteer work, he wasn't really getting paid for it. In exchange, he would be allowed to rent out the garage for, 1 or 2 dates a month to run his own essentially backyard shows out of the garage. So I coordinated this online, and then I got a few of my guys to go out to hit the APW garage, and we basically had matches there for Nick. It was called WFW. So we did basically wrestled for him for about, the tail end of 2002 through the middle of 2003. And during the last maybe 1 or 2 shows he did before he called it quits, which was spring of 2003, he had told me, hey, Mike Monis and Donovan Morgan, who opened up their own school, they're doing a tryout. You should sign up for it. It's pretty, I think it's like $35. And if you get in, you'll get trained to be a pro. And at that time, that was pretty much the only that was the only goal left for me, because all the guys at WFW, I met Chupacabra because he was wrestling there as a backyard or two. What is it? He's called Arcade at Hood Slam. He's the angry video game nerd.
What's it called? Chance Calloway he was at
Chance
PWI?
Calloway, right?
Yeah.
So he was Chance Calloway there, and I met him, and both of them went up to SPW and started their training right when they were finishing up doing the backyard stuff. So I was like, okay, well, maybe this is the next step for me. So I went, that's where I led to the tryout. They pretty much wrapped up the stuff they did in the garage. I did the tryout. And at that tryout, not only you, but Chemo.
Yeah.
Chemo was there. And I'm trying to, Ray Kijimura.
Yep.
So I'm not trying to think if there's anyone else I could remember. But yeah, that's where it started. And the tryout was what it was. And you might be able to refresh my memory. I remember doing a bench press contest of how many reps you could do. I remember doing a promo, which I think you had to do a 30 or 60 second promo. And then they did basic drills and cardio. Sounds about right.
Yeah. I remember it started off with doing runs. That was the beginning. They were like, okay, we're going to run back and forth in the parking lot. And then we came in, it was the bench press. I think there was they might have had us do 10 and 1s, but I don't remember. I remember they had us do that during training, but I don't remember if it was during tryout. But I do remember we did the promo because that was the only thing I did good. That was it. At the end, Michael Modest was like, okay, let's be real. You were shit at everything else, but you were the best at the promo. And I was like, well, thank you. That's wonderful.
Maybe a manager.
Yeah, that's what I ended up doing. I was training to be a manager, but yeah. Yeah, I was actually at a couple of those WFW shows. I remember one time Nick needed a ref, and he was like, "Will you be ref for the show?" And I was like, "Sure, why not?" He's like, "Okay, cool. Here's the shirt," and he gave me a ref shirt that was like a size small, and I was
Yeah.
like, "Bro, that's not happening." I was like, "I don't know where you think any of that's gonna go." So I had to like put it like in like my back pocket. I had like a Superman shirt on. I was like Superman the ref. Basically, is
I remember
ridiculous.
that. Now that you mentioned that, I remember wrestling a match, and I think I have the footage somewhere where the referee is wearing a Superman shirt. So that was you.
Yeah.
I think I was wrestling like Super Joe or the Masochist or
Yeah.
someone like that. I have that footage somewhere. I'll find it.
That shit was fun, man. That was a good time. That was just like a lot of people just having fun, and it was great. But that early PWI stuff, it was very like everyone, especially around that tryout time period, was so optimistic about Pro Wrestling Iron. It was like, hey guys, we're gonna do this right. Everything's gonna be done great. You know, we got this connection to Pro Wrestling Noah. Everything's blah blah blah. And then of course, eventually that would all go away. But at the beginning, it seemed like everyone was gung ho on Pro Wrestling Iron.
Yeah, I mean that was the general consensus from everyone I spoke to. But granted, I was only speaking really to people on that side of the fence.
Yeah.
There was this like civil war between APW and Pro Wrestling Iron, and you heard it was like a completely different story, no matter depending on who you spoke with, right? But yeah, being on that side, I mean, they were basically saying that Roland's corrupt. It's just really bad business there. It's all in it for themselves. The wrestlers aren't getting any opportunities. This is where it's at. We have Misawa. We had Misawa here. We can get guys out there. So I felt like, oh, wow, it's an awesome place. They told me, and fast forwarding past the contest, they would tell me that they now have a connection with a lot of the Lucha guys. So they're offering, training in American, Japanese, and Lucha Libre. And I'm like, wow, I'm getting like a taste of everything, right? Talk about being well-versed in every single style. I'm like, this is perfect.
Yeah. And when you actually started wrestling and, consistently, and you started checking out the different promotions, Big Time Wrestling, All Pro Wrestling, and now you're starting to like mix around SPW and everything. What did you start noticing like the differences were between the promotions, or was there a difference?
I mean, I think there are like some differences between them. I think there are philosophical differences in some, like that in like how businesses ran. Some companies valued the production far more than others did. Some value just more of the psychology and the wrestling. The APW was very old school because of Roland. So in that sense, like things how it ran for Gym Wars were very old school. Like a lot of companies I work for then and now, it's like when they do booking meetings, they just basically like say, all right, everybody, let's get together. Here's the card. You guys go this amount of time, blah, 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 blah. And they just read it all down. The old Gym Wars, it was like you go into a room with the booker and Roland, who wasn't booking at the time. He was just more the promoter, right? So you go into an office, Roland's office, with them, the booker, and your opponent. And they go over like specific details and things like that. It was just a different dynamic. When they got like television for a little short while at Gym Wars, they really valued production, working the hard cam. Not every promotion does that. BTW was really more about the audience from my perspective working there. They have this really hardcore fan base that, you could see the same people from when I started in 2009 that are still going to these shows.
Yeah.
A decade later. It's like the same passionate hardcore fan base. They love their fly-in talent. So there's differences. I mean, and no one is really right or wrong. It's just different wrestling. And that's the beautiful thing about pro wrestling, especially now. I think more fans are starting to realize that there's a flavor of wrestling for everybody.
Yeah.
And you can have multiple promotions in one smaller area, like the Bay.
Yeah.
And you're going to get a different product every time. Like going to an APW show in Daly City is a totally different experience than going to BTW in Newark. Which is different than Gold Rush in Pacifica, which is different than SPW in Sacramento, right? So
yeah. I always thought that, like, especially with Big Time Wrestling, because I used to work doing like their website and like taking pictures around ringside and stuff. And I remember like a lot of guys At the time, I also helped out at APW, but I remember a lot of guys at APW, they were very like, oh, big time wrestling, like kind of like it's like a carny actor kind of thing.
Right.
And I'm like, hey, you could say what you want. They're drawing consistently better than a lot of companies. Yeah. You can't really say that for a lot of people.
And what time was that? Like, give me a year.
Oh, shoot. 2000, 2001.
And I can say this now. APW back then, I don't go that far back, but I bet guys like Vinny Massaro could probably say something like this. But even when I started at APW in 2008, it was still like that. So they had this idea that they trained at a higher level than most other companies, and that they almost looked down upon a lot of them. You know what I mean? Like, they don't go through the rigor that the boot camp was designed for. They don't get taught by people that were taught by, legends like Tony. I'm thinking of
Rick Thompson.
Rick Thompson, but I can't think of his name at the moment. I'm drawing a blank. It'll come back to me. But even prior to that, like, because Roland prides himself on being able to, associate with all these guys in the 70s and the Warshire and all that stuff. So they looked upon themselves as sort of elitist in that way. And yeah, they would sort of shun other promotions and that. But that sort of faded pretty quickly. Right when I started in APW, there was like an exodus in that, like, Gabe Ramirez, who was booking, he pretty much left to do his own thing at Revolution within 3 months of me signing up. And that, like, not only caused a rift in general, but I think it changed Roland a little bit. And then he started to change his tone, change his views of other promotions. He started encouraging more camaraderie with other promotions, and why don't you go help Ring Crew with this company? And he wasn't like that for the first I knew him, and from everything I heard, he definitely wasn't like that before. It was more like, hey, you either work APW and you excel, or you go work for those other promotions, and you're not going to go there, kind of thing.
Well, like, we talked to Michael Modest. We have this like documentary coming out near the end of the year, and he talked about Roland Alexander. The reason APW started with Michael Modest is because he was working for another guy, and he said, I'm going to put that fucking guy out of business. Right. That's what he said. That's how it started. And then, like with Vinny, he mentioned on the podcast, he was at the APW tryout. He didn't participate. He didn't do anything. He was just there, and he was photographed there. And because he was at the PWI tryout, Roland was like, cool, now you're blacklisted from APW. And he was like, yeah. But like, okay. So like, that doesn't, like Roland was always very vindictive. It's good to hear that, towards the end, he kind of softened that, and he kind of maybe he started realizing, it's not that one, it's wrestling. It's not, it's not diplomatic war here. But also there's nothing like the decline of business all around that'll really make people start to reevaluate their priorities. Mm-hmm. Like, I feel like we were involved very early on with like Pro Wrestling Iron. That was when like wrestling was so freaking hot. Like, it was insane. Like, ECW was still on television along with WCW, along with WWF. And it was just like, indies were hot. Everyone was hot. Everything was great. And then like towards like the late 2010-ish, whatever, indies were hard.
Oh, man. It was bad.
Yeah.
It was bad.
So I'd like to hear your perspective as someone who really like kind of felt that ebb and flow, because I feel like now we're in another boom where I feel up until freaking COVID happened. I felt like indies were hot again. 100%. So what was your experience like feeling out this roller coaster?
So, it's funny. I was just talking to another guy, longtime APW guy, about this, like maybe 3 days ago, about that. You were seeing guys now that have been in the business for 2 years, 3 years. Like, they might as well just be rookies. And they're young, they're talented, and all of a sudden they're contracted. Like, they're working at AEW or Impact or Ring of Honor or NXT. And him and I were talking, going, Jesus, like, did we come in at the right or wrong time, right? Because when I came in, because obviously I was at Iron for a little while, but I stepped away, and then I came back, and then APW was 2008 was when I debuted though, and it was so dead. Like everyone was struggling to draw like 40 or 50 people. Didn't matter where you go. The only guy, and to his credit, that did really well during that time was Gabe. Gabe found a niche with Lucha Libre, and in that 2008 to 2011, 12 time frame that I worked for Gabe, he was consistently drawing 500 plus. But he was the only one, and everywhere else it was bad. I mean, we didn't even charge money to get into Gym Wars, and we would sometimes struggle to get 40. It was just it was a hard time, and it's just funny now. It's like, I mean, COVID threw us all for a loop. But prior to COVID, you would now get, I mean, as long as you promote right, now we have, I think the internet has sort of matured a little bit and how things are getting promoted online and social media. But you can get crowds now, 200-300, which is a normal. It seems like it's normal wherever you go. And now there's IWTV. So indies now have a much larger platform if you want to go that route to broadcast your stuff. But it's just crazy. But yeah, I got in there, and you're scraping around NorCal, and NorCal was an island, is what we were talking about. It's like you can work for a dozen promotions, and there literally were like a dozen plus promotions in one small condensed area because everyone wants to be the booker and everyone wants to be a promoter. That all drew poorly, and you can get your reps in with matches, but no one sees it. Southern California, if anyone from California got praise, it was usually down south. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, we were like effectively an island. And that didn't really change until I felt like the mid 20 teens.
Yeah.
Which is coincidentally when I had first decided to like finally like retire, so to speak. I felt like I retired, and then they did King of Indies again, like 3 months later. And then I felt like, wow, okay, Evolve is really putting a footprint into the indies of what it could be, and ROH is doing really well, and now all these indies are popping up that are doing really great. Gorilla became like this monster kind of a promotion for indies, and then it just boomed again all the way. And APW sold like 4,000 or 5,000 seats at the Cow Palace. It's just like, what's going on here? But yeah, and then we were doing great until COVID. But
yeah,
I try to remain optimistic that when things finally normalize, people just are starving for entertainment, whether it be going to the movies, coming to a wrestling show, and they will come back, and we will hopefully continue the boom, or a new boom, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, I feel like, part of it is like, I'm very much, of this like California mindset that like, yeah, we need to do everything we can for like the virus, like to actually like stop this from going. But it is like frustrating when you see like other states that can have like outdoor shows with social distancing, and they're having like GCWs running shows. And it's like frustrating from being over here and seeing that, because being like, damn it, I kind of wish,
yeah,
I'll go sit like 10 feet away from someone else on a football field and watch a show. Like, come on,
I go up and down on it. I do get a little frustrated. Like, here I am ready to wrestle, and nowhere's open here. But then every time one of those shows pops up, and then you hear this story of 3 people at the venue contracted COVID-19, and you're like, oh, well, maybe we're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Because no amount of wrestling is worth someone dying over this, right? So
yeah,
I'm all for, obviously I just wrestled in Florida, right? So, but I'm all for still doing shows now, as long as the proper protocol and safety measures are taking place. The problem is that, I don't know how many indies can guarantee that.
Yeah.
I would expect that they,
just from a cost standpoint.
Yeah. You require a COVID test for every performer, whether you're a wrestler, a ring announcer, referee, it doesn't matter. And that has to be done within X number of days of the show, and it has to be negative, and you have to have proof at the venue that you tested negative for it, right? Temperature checks, social distancing for locker rooms, social distancing for fans. I mean, it's a lot of work to manage all that. And I think that's why most indies just aren't running because of it. I can't speak for other indies right now that are running if they are practicing that, but I can tell you that if they're not, I'm not comfortable. One of the reasons I was, obviously a lot of people would never turn down an opportunity like AEW, but to their credit, they take this stuff very seriously. And I did have to go through a lot of steps from a safety protocol in order to get there. And that made me feel actually more comfortable as a performer and willing to, go through the travel to get out there and go through all that.
So how did this opportunity come about? Like, how did you hear about it? What was what was the steps that you needed to kind of take to get to there?
I think it has, a lot to do with positive word of mouth, and people going to bat for you and whatnot. And, I had new photos taken with the character. So I was trying to get those out there. And I sort of got, it came about within, I want to say just under 2 weeks from the taping date that I just got notified, hey, if you can be in Jacksonville in the state, we'll use you. So it sort of caught me off guard because I wasn't really expecting it. I had taken a couple steps to, be ready for it. But then I'm like, it may not happen. And then it happened. So then I'm like, okay, this is real. Let's do the next things. Let me go take the COVID test and let me get, basically dot my I's, cross my T's kind of thing. And then that includes like getting, make my flights, hotel, all that stuff, make sure it's all squared away. And I literally got notified maybe 2 weeks before I had to be there.
Wow.
So I had to get a lot of my ducks in a row and set it all up, but it happened and it was awesome. It was a really, truly great experience. Hope it continues that way. So we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, that's the good thing too, is I feel like, if you get called by them, you're a little bit more optimistic than like a WWE thing, because you see like Dark and they go like, we have 17 matches this week on Dark. And you're like, well, you know what? I think there's a good chance I'm going to get used on here. It's kind of
no, for sure. I can tell you now that with WWE, I've worked as an extra for them. I want to say probably 8 to 10 times where I go through the loop, right? So it's usually a Raw, SmackDown back to back, or sometimes it's been a pay-per-view, Raw, SmackDown, those kind of loops. And of those 8 to 10 appearances, the only time I've actually wrestled was that last one I did with AJ, where we did, the Yolo County thing against Heavy Machinery. Every other time I either was just not used, or I was a police officer, a security guard, a SWAT guy, a paramedic, a random guy standing in the hallway, a rosebud, you can name them all, but, and sometimes you don't even get used at all. And you just sit in catering and, twiddle your thumbs. But this was pretty cool because I was told I would be used at least once before even getting there. So that was a nice change to actually have some, that kind of proactive, yes, we do want you here, and yes, we will use you in some capacity.
I'm sure you got a chance to talk to, you wrestled Jungle Boy before over here in San Jose. So you had a chance to catch up with all those guys you already knew?
Yeah, it was pretty cool. A lot of guys that I had seen on the indies out here. I ran back into Miro. Him and I and a few other guys in APW, so like Marcus Mack and Jody Christopherson, Rick Luxury, all those guys. We used to do road trips down to Southern California and work for Rikishi's promotion where Miro trained.
Okay.
So it was called Knox Pro, and we worked a lot of the Knox Pro shows, and Miro was on there. So I ran into him. I ran into Jungle Boy, Brian Cage, who I've wrestled a few times. Got nice to see him again. And then there was plenty of others, but a lot of familiar faces. So it's always cool to see those guys.
And how would you compare the vibes backstage at AEW versus backstage at WWE?
I'd like to say that it's a little more, how would I explain it? WWE feels more like a movie production company in that there's just a lot more people back there, and it's like a highway of just like people going in all sorts of directions, from wrestlers to writers to costume designers and this and that. And you're just sort of like a fly on the wall there. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's just super busy back there. AEW felt like it felt like an indie promotion just on a whole big stage level, if that makes sense. Because you get a sense of like camaraderie. Like when you go into an indie locker room, there's, guys just, shooting the breeze with each other, hanging out. There's people that are talking about their matches, whatever. I got that sort of vibe there, but it did feel like on another level, like big league level. You know what I mean?
Okay. Yeah.
It felt like, I guess, a little more lax, if that makes sense. It was less about like crazy business and production and more about let's put out the best product and let's make sure we're a family and let's talk to each other and let's hang out. But yeah, I'd say that was the biggest difference between the two.
Okay. We talked a little bit about, being able to use your gimmick on the actual AEW show and doing all that stuff. Last time I saw you, you were the Futra, David Dutra.
I know, right? Crazy. It's changed.
Now you're Battle King. How did that come about? How did you decide to craft this character to morph your persona?
So when I first came back, I decided actually at the Cow Palace show for APW, the first one they did. I took my family there just to go watch as a fan, and I got basically the bug bite, right? So I'm like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I can't believe it's grown into something like this. I'm getting the itch. Originally, I stepped away from wrestling to focus on my family. I had another baby on the way. And now that the kids were a little older, I took my son to that show. Funny thing is, Cody was wrestling on that show at the Cow Palace. And he was wrestling Joey Ryan in a cage. And he walked around the ring and he actually threw his T-shirt to my son and caught the shirt. And he was like, "Oh, you should wrestle again, Daddy." And he's like, "You could wrestle Cody and this and that." And it was a super cool story. So like me getting the bug bite and then me sort of getting the confirmation from my son, like, "Hey, I really want to see you wrestle again." I'm like, okay, now it's time. I should probably train and, see if I can get back into it. Right. And then I trained the remainder of 2017 to get into ring shape for that. And then I said, okay, well, let me just change up the name a little bit. Like it's Double D forever. Let me just try Dylan Drake, who I'm sure you know. He used to call me the Futra way back in the day. Is just like, oh, you're a young up and coming guy, and it's a play on your last name. And I think it's funny, whatever. He calls me that all the time. I just decided, you know what, I could sort of play off that and change my name a little bit just to be different when I come back. And I did that, but then with that same year, just by the end of 2018, I sort of felt like I needed like something drastic as a change, because what I started to realize is that I'm getting older. I'm not going to be the indie guy that's going to be doing 450 splashes and corkscrew planchas and all that stuff. I like and pride myself more on being more of a technical wrestler. And the indies have evolved to such a level that it almost favors someone who can do a lot of the high spots and the high flying. And I wasn't going to be that guy. And my body was telling me, yeah, you're probably not going to be that guy anymore. So at that point, I sort of felt like I needed like something that was more character driven and less like athletically driven, to where if I end up as I get older not being able to do certain things, that it's okay, because what sells you is not so much the moves, but it's the character, right? So in fact, we're just past the 2-year mark. So in October of 2018, I was preparing for a UGWA show in San Jose, actually. I went to, me and a buddy of mine before that show, we went to like a festival in Campbell, because the show was in San Jose and I was in Campbell for whatever reason. And we came across all these masks that a vendor at this festival were selling that were all like skull based, like almost medieval looking.
Yeah.
And I don't know why, but I looked at those things. I'm like, I could see myself wearing something like that as some kind of entrance. Now, how can I have a character that, would allow me to wear some kind of a mask? So I bought a few of them. And then after I wrestled the show and the rest of that week, I just kept thinking, like, how can I use something with this kind of like iconography? And then the idea of the Battle King was born. But the vision I had for it required a lot of stuff that I didn't have. And I knew it would take time. So I wanted to grow my hair out. And my hair was like this short, spiked. Mm-hmm. So I knew that would take time. So I started growing my hair in October of 2018. And it did take 2 years, but my hair does go down to like here now when it's not tied back. But in between all that, I worked with a designer coming up with drafts for the character, different kind of entrance gear, armor. With t-shirt designs, and then the gear was pretty pricey. So I couldn't just buy it all in one lump sum. So I started piecing together pieces. So the first thing I did buy was, if you watch Dark, was that shoulder piece. Mm-hmm. So I had that custom made. The next stuff was through Main Event Gear, which was mainly like the trunks, the knee pads, the kick pads. And then I have a bunch of custom masks, but it wasn't the appropriate time or place to use that on a dark match on AEW. But I have a lot of custom masks and crowns that go on for the entrances too. So assuming the indies start back up soon, I will incorporate those in as well. But yeah, it's been like a project on the side. And then basically 2019 was just eating away time, just continuing to do the future stuff while I kept growing my hair out. And I started to plant seeds in 2019 as well. So every now and then I would put something online. I remember I put a video on over a year ago where I had my scepter that I finally got in the mail for part of the character. And I just drug it on the concrete ground of my garage and filmed it. Like, it's like I'm dragging this thing to battle kind of thing. And I posted it, and no context, but I just kept putting little teasers out there. I started turning heel at various promotions. I changed my finishing move. I dubbed it Heaven's Blade, which is like sort of a metaphor for a guillotine.
Okay.
It's like an old medieval king would chop off the heads of people, and it's an elbow drop to the back of the neck. So I started, telling promotion, hey, this is my new finish. Call it this. I started claiming to be the king. I used hashtags like Hail to the King. I started putting little snippets and I was doing all this while still being called the Future and stuff. But I knew that I was leading towards this for 2020. The last thing, because I know I'm going really long on this question.
Oh, totally fine.
So we did an angle on the last APW show that was done. I lost in a singles match to Adam. I played that whole match heel, Adam Thornstowe. Match was over, and then they do the light heavyweight the light heavyweight APW junior heavyweight title match. And at the end of it, I attacked Starboy Charlie, turn heel, and basically set the place for the Battle King to debut at the next show. So then we do the graphics, the match for Blueprints was the name of the show. And that was in March of 2020. And so I'm pumped at this point, right? I'm like, finally, like, this thing is going to come to fruition. It's been a year and a half since I started it. I'm ready. I have all the gear set up. And it was 4 days, I think 4 days, or it was 3 or 4 days before the show is when, like, the NBA shut down the season.
Oh, geez.
And then, like, a domino effect. Like,
yeah.
Marcus Mack heard from Daly City, and Daly City shut everything down. So that was canceled. And then you would just, all my bookings, because I had maybe like 8 or 9 more bookings for the next maybe 6 weeks. And it was like, cancel. I'm like, well, shit, I just spent a lot of money and time on this character. I don't even know if I'm going to be able to debut it. And yeah, so I mean, most people won't know this unless they listen to this podcast, but the literal debut of the Battle King was on AEW Dark. I had never done the character until then.
Wow.
Yeah.
Damn, that's crazy. Yeah, it's like what a massive like wind out of your sails to like, yes, finally gonna happen, baby. Here we go.
Yeah.
Shit.
You have no idea like how pissed I was. I was so mad. And I don't want to like tell you how much I spent because I'm sort of embarrassed, but like this gear from that, because that scepter is I'll show you. Look, check it out. This thing is like actually a real scepter. It's not a prop. So it's actually metal. So it's something I have to check on a plane, right?
Yeah, I was gonna say that's not going into your carry-on.
Yeah, no, it's yeah. So like everything that I did for this character, I wanted it to be like A-class, like top-notch kind of stuff. So yeah, I put a lot of money and time and effort into everything. And then, yeah, when they canceled the bookings and then I'm like, oh, you know what, this COVID thing, not knowing what we do now, in March, we're like, oh, it'll be back to normal by June. Yeah. And then in June, you're like, shit, maybe September or October. And then by August, we're like, fuck, 2021, like maybe.
Yeah, so, I had a bunch of podcasts backed up because I normally listen while I'm at work, and I got furloughed. So I was like, there's like a back catalog of podcasts in my phone that are just like, so that, but I've been like slowly going through them, but some of them are like months old. So like I've been going through and I've been listening and hearing people talk about it in like April and May.
If they only knew.
They're like, they're sitting there like, I mean, it can't last past June, right? Right. Yeah. Like that, everyone's like so sure. Everyone's like, oh yeah, everything will be fine. No, but that's why I love wrestling. Wrestling's crazy. So like Battle King, giant scepter, crazy leather custom stuff. And then like, so my two times I saw you wrestle recently was that, and just a couple weeks before that when I was pulling footage for Matt Carlos's episode as the Polyester Express. So
night and day.
Yeah. You're like, oh man, isn't wrestling fun? Like this is the same dude. Isn't that so weird?
Yeah. Polyester Express. Oh, those are good times. Wow. So I will say one thing about that. The first 3 months of that character, it was cool to be a heel because we really could not dance. So when you can't dance for shit and you just try, it looks terrible and it makes total sense for people to boo you, right? And we just roll like, yeah, we know we suck and yeah, please boo us. We're heels. But we got the shit beat out of us for months because we just got booked against John Anderson, who, for those of you who don't know, is like this giant strongman guy. So, yeah, we would just get whooped month after month because we do the same match at every show as he toured. And then it sort of flipped, right? So we finally got through paying our dues against John Anderson and we got put in legitimate tag team matches, but then we became baby faces, which for two guys who can't dance that had to be like disco dancing guys, it was really awkward because like they'd watch us dance and they're like we're supposed to be cheering that? You get in the ring and wrestle.
When Alex Wright was supposed to be a face in the beginning and he was out there doing that dance and you're like, am I supposed to cheer for this? Like, what's going on?
Yeah. Once we got in the ring, Matt and I were good enough to like, we can do like, double missile drop kicks, wrestle basically like the Rockers or whatever. And people dug it, but it's like to the ring and we're trying to do like, oh, let me just do this thing. Or let me just try. And I don't know. I always felt out of place doing it, but that's one of those situations where an opportunity opens and that's a promotion that draws consistently. So you get big crowds. Like you can't pass it up. So you'll pretty much take, and we were super green. So yeah, we pretty much take whatever we get.
Yeah. I thought, when I watched that clip Anderson's chops, holy shit.
Oh, so bad.
I mean, like, I'm no stranger to hard chops. I've seen a Shane Cody match once or twice, but, but John Anderson he was throwing some heaters, man.
Yeah, man. There was a battle royal that we were on in the Bakersfield Dome that Gabe ran. And when Anderson came out, I purposely, because I was already on the ground, I rolled onto the apron and I double clung the bottom rope and I just sat there. I sat there because they had a spot where he like destroys everyone, and then everyone who's left all team up to dump him over. And I just sat there around the rope the entire spot time until he got dumped out. I was tired of getting
amazing.
It was like 110 in Bakersfield, so the dome was like a sweat box.
Oh, geez. Oof. Oh, man. Yeah. How'd you find, like, you know, working like lucha crowd versus working a regular wrestling crowd?
It's totally different. You really have to work a character there. They really dig comedy too. So I think that part of the reason why like Gabe wanted us to do the disco thing. They wanted to be more entertained with that. And then they do appreciate obviously the high flying. So the more, flips and jumps and dives that you can do, obviously that's what they appreciate. And they really don't like, at least from my experience, they're not like the technical wrestling kind of stuff. I had the experience of wrestling in Mexico once via Revolution. And at that point, they had me under a hood as La Pantera. I was not a lucha guy, so I didn't train to be lucha. I mean, when I was younger, I thought it would be the coolest thing to do lucha. And then when I got trained by APW, I started to appreciate like the American and Japanese styles far more. So when I'm working in Mexico, I should have, in hindsight, learned a little more lucha and tried to do that. But I wrestled a very Americanized style, like, lock up, headlock, tackle, drop down, whatever. And it did not fly. Here's just to give you context. I was wrestling a guy named Steve Payne, and Steve Payne is a Puerto Rican, and Puerto Ricans and Mexicans do not get along. So it's like he was going out there to be the heel and be the Puerto Rican that clowns on Mexicans. I was this luchador who apparently I was supposed to be from Japan, right? So
okay.
La Pantera was originally supposed to be billed to be like a Ultimo Dragon from Japan. So I'm a neutral guy in this sense, right? I go out there and it's almost as if immediately these fans are like, bullshit, this guy's not Japanese. He's totally a white guy under a hood, and he wrestles like an American. So wow. I got booed out of the building, and it was the bad heat, right? It was the X-Pac heat. It was the bad, like, get the fuck out of our ring heat.
Oh, shit.
So I still appreciate the experience because it sort of taught me, like, you really need to know your audience. But it was like one of the largest crowds. I mean, it's like 6,000 people.
Oh, wow. How long was the match?
Oh, the match was like 6-7 minutes.
That's a long 6-7 minutes when you're getting booed, though.
It's a long 6-7 minutes when they don't buy what you're selling.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it was still a great experience all in all. When you talk about working a lucha crowd versus an American crowd, and let me segue just a little bit here because it's relevant. I feel like the indies and wrestling fans in general, I guess, have evolved over the last 10 years. I will say that the kind of matches that I would see around Northern California indies in 2010 that would get over don't typically get over now. I think that wrestling has evolved in a way that things like combination attacks are really big now, and they weren't so much then. You see a lot of moves where it's like strike, duck, kick, suplex, and you hold on to it, lift them up, twist them, pop. It's just a lot of fluid combination kind of stuff. So even in American wrestling, you see like the style is changing, and fans will react differently too. I will say that now more than ever in the business, there are so many different types of fans, even just within one area. So you go to a Hood Slam show, and those fans are completely different than if you go to APW versus going to PWG versus going to the UGWA in San Jose. There's just you just have to know your audience. Some fans love the violence. Some fans love technical wrestling. If you go to any New Japan show or the stuff they do in LA, like you know what you get when you go to a New Japan show. So they're going to really appreciate the technical, the selling, the heart, the contact, the strikes.
Yeah. I always feel like, there's like a being a wrestling fan. I feel like there's like a certain evolution you have to have, because you start off, everyone's a mark when you start. You're watching Hulk Hogan on TV or Stone Cold on TV. You're like, this is the greatest thing ever.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what's going on, but I love it. That kind of thing. And then when you get smartened up to a lot of stuff, you kind of sometimes go overboard. Like I remember for the longest time being like, well, this guy can't do shit because he's not doing, he's not doing the craziest, most innovative move I've ever seen. He's just doing a regular suplex. Bullshit. That's who cares? Sucks.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's a horrible way to be too, because at that point you're really like, you're all like sizzle and no like substance. You're kind of just like, I just want the most specifically exactly what I want, but nothing else. And then eventually you start to like realize that everything is like a mix of everything. You have to kind of mix it all in. So I love the fact that like fans who are smart marks, quote unquote, will still cheer at events nowadays, where it seems like for a long time they would just be like, and you're like,
yeah,
that's not helping no one. No performer in the ring is stoked about a bunch of dudes quietly judging you like you're on American Idol on how crisp you did a Frankensteiner. You know what I mean? Like going, okay, all right, I get what he did there. Like that's bullshit. Nobody likes that.
Yeah, like in the early 2000s, it would have been like, that driver wasn't high enough on the shoulders or the neck area. It didn't look devastating, so you're okay.
Yeah.
Now it's like, I didn't see any dive outs, and you punched that guy, but the leg wasn't slapped, so the connection, like it's just funny how like those kind of things happen. Because I remember when I first got in, it was like strong style kind of stuff. Everything was about strong style. So it's like neck drop this, inverted, driver that, forearms, and you have to like nail them. Like right here too, right? And now that shit's gone out the window. Like you will get blackballed if you're wrestling like that in a lot of places now. Now it's more like I just saw a meme on Facebook like a week ago where it said, have you ever seen those memes where it's like 4 squares and there's 4 things in there and it says one of these has to go?
Oh, yeah.
And you have to pick which one of the most. And this one was like suicide dive, like the little indie kick on the apron to the inside, a leg slap. And it was one other that I was just dying because I'm like, yeah, those are the things that I feel like I see all the time now.
Probably a V trigger, a running knee is probably the other one.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. It was always like, yeah, those things are like, it doesn't even matter who the wrestler is. It's become so commonplace in every match. But I remember back earlier, it used to be like big forearm to the neck, brain buster, Japanese suplex, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and then I always love like the innovative dude. So I gravitated immediately when I was watching AEW to Vinny Massaro, because I was like, he's doing some crazy shit I'd never seen anyone do. It was like the first time I saw someone do like a vertebreaker was him. I was like, this is the craziest thing I've ever seen. What the world? But yeah, now it's like, now if you hit like a snap suplex and you hit it just right, I'm like, ooh, okay. Like, you know what I mean? So I guess it all morphs over time.
I think fans have become like polished, Yeah. Now I think they're starting to appreciate the art more than one little aspect of it. So
yeah, and to me, I'd much rather go to a show where I see a lot of different styles than all of one thing. Because like I appreciate a great 20-minute technical match. Like I love it. I think that's like delicious. But if I gotta watch it for 3 hours straight, like, dude, give me a breather here.
Give me a variety.
Yeah. All right, brother. It's about that time. The booker has run out. It's time to take it home. I got a list of questions here. Feel free to take as much time as you want on any of them. First one, any favorite road stories?
Favorite road stories. So I know that Matt Carlos brought up Handlebar Randall's.
Yes.
I actually have some clips from that. So if you want them, I can.
Oh, absolutely.
Because at that time, I was like all about, I'm going to record it because I had a little like mini DV or hard drive handy cam. I'm like, I'm going to record as much of this stuff as I can because I know that 10, 20, 30 years from now, like I'm going to really appreciate it. And a lot of the boys are. And now, like, I would get shit for it. Like, why are you recording backstage in the locker room? Like, what the fuck are you doing kind of thing? But I'd be like, trust me, you're going to really appreciate I'm taking this stuff now. So that road trip, I did film for that where they, the long story short is Matt and I had decided to go to a different fast food joint at the stop we were in. So we went to a Carl's Jr. and the other guys went there and they thought it'd be funny. So they just drove off and left us there. But I had my camera rolling. So Matt and I were just like filming and like, oh, I wonder if they'll ever come back for us and this and that. But a similar road trip, because both of those road trips were going down to Los Angeles to work for Rikishi's promotion. There was another promotion, another road trip where we relied on Jody Christopherson to get a hotel or motel room that we could all share. So we did this taping, and we needed, it was like I think it was a 2-shot taping. So I think we were doing Knox Pro, and then I think we were going to Billy Blade's show, Vendetta Pro Wrestling. So we needed a place to stay, and we thought Jody had secured a room, and he never did. So he's like, oh, we just walk up and get one. It's not a big deal. And we're like, idiot, you're supposed to reserve these things. What if there are no rooms? So we go into this hotel room, or we go to this hotel lobby. There's no rooms. Then we start making phone calls. And like, yeah, no vacancy, no matter where we go. And then we come across this motel that, you know, I can't describe it really. And I do have footage somewhere, so maybe I could find the footage. But we come across this motel, and it's straight out of like a horror film. Like the no vacancy lights, it's like flickering, and some of the letters are not lit. And you're like, oh man, this looks bad. You just look like the railings on the upstairs awning for the upstairs half of the motel, like they're bent and broken. And we go in, and it's like this dude's like eating popcorn, falling on his shirt. And he just sort of gets up and he's like, you need a room. And the rooms don't, I mean, it's 2013, 2012. So you think most people have key cards now, and he just gets like a key ring, and he's all, here's your key. We go in, and this I'm rolling, right? And we go into this room, and it's like 5 of us. It's like Sparky Ballard, myself, Jody, I think Matt Carlos, Dylan Drake, Rick Luxury. Like there's a bunch of us. And we go into this room, and first thing you notice is that there's a TV that is mounted from the ceiling, and it's like dangling like this. And it's a CRT. It's not a flat screen. So it's an old blocky CRT. It's hanging from the ceiling by one pole, and it's swaying back and forth from the wind as we open the door. We're like, what the fuck? I've never seen something mount like this. And then we walk around, and the bed sheets were used. So we're like, oh, this is so gross. Like, I don't know if we should like go on. I don't know. We walk around, and then there's another bed. And the weirdest thing about this bed was that it had a full-length 6-foot mirror, the level of the bed horizontally. So if you were laying flat on the bed and you looked over, you could see the entire length of yourself. So it was almost like it was some kind of like perverted mirror, that like you would be in bed with someone and be fucking, and you just look at the mirror. And it's like, oh, this, you could watch yourself. And it was, because it's weird. The mirror was only about, I don't know, 18 inches tall, but it was the whole length of the bed and mounted right next to the bed. So we thought that was
that's weird.
And like the sheets were untucked. So we lifted the mattress up, and there was actual human feces underneath the bed. Like on the, and it's, we're like, oh my God, we were like flipping the fuck out. We just dying laughing, right? Because we were like, this is something that is so bad that it's almost like we were on some kind of candid camera show. I'm like, how can we make these guys flip out? But it was like, it was the most disgusting place you've ever been to. You walked into the bathroom. There was no hot water. The shower door was off its hinges, so you had to sort of like lift the door off to get into the shower. But of course, there's no hot water, so no one wanted to take a shower. Ultimately, half the people decided that the carpet was cleaner than the beds, so they slept on the carpet. Dylan, Drake, and I were like, "Fuck this! We will sleep out in the minivan." So we just parked it. We got in the minivan, reclined as far back as we can, and we slept in the minivan that night. And it was also like middle of winter. So, at night it was probably like 44, 43, 42 degrees outside. And
Wow.
we can't run the car all night, right? So we were just like bundled up in there. But if I could find the video footage, that will make the story that much better.
Okay, yeah. I remember I went with a buddy of mine. We went to Philadelphia. My friend, you probably met him or know him, Luke Hawks. He runs Wildcat in Louisiana.
Yeah, in Louisiana.
Yeah. But he ran a show at the ECW Arena in Philadelphia. So me and my buddy were like, "Oh, let's go. Why not? It'll be fun." I always wanted to check out the ECW Arena. Might as well do it for a show of somebody I know is running, because you know what I mean. Might as well support him. So we go there, and the hotel we get is in like Leicester, Pennsylvania, which is like right by the airport. It's just like it's like the shitty motel. But we walked in and wasn't anywhere near as bad as the place you're describing, but we noticed both the bathroom and the front door had very specific like dents, and it's the exact place where if you wanted to kick in a door, that's what you would use.
Right.
So both the front door and the bathroom door, just like these dents right where someone's foot just went right through. I was like, That's great. That's great.
Oh boy.
It's always a fun place. I consider wrestling to be a very creative thing besides being very physical. You have to put together character, put together matches, do all that stuff. What creatively do you like doing besides professional wrestling?
I don't do it now, but I would say like for maybe the past 10 or 15 years, from basically when I got out of high school until maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I was really big into video editing. So I would take a lot of my old footage, whether it be my old backyard wrestling footage, or even stuff that I did in my early part of my pro career. And I loved making entrance videos for WFW guys. I made entrance videos for them too, and all that kind of stuff. I would put together promo packs. I did a lot of editing for APW in the first, 3 or 4 years that we did Gym Wars there. A lot of the Gym Wars entrance videos or introductory videos were all done by me. Vignettes, that kind of stuff. So, that's something creatively that I enjoy doing. And then I would actually take that outside, like with my friends, and we'd make little short films, or we just goof off. And then I remember when Jackass was like the big thing on MTV. We in our creative minds decided, we'll call it Ass Jacks, just to flip the words around, but we'll just do our own stupid stunts. Yeah, it's super clever, right? And we'd film ourselves doing that kind of stuff, like crazy stunts, and I would splice it all together on my computer and put that together. But I think that would be like just one of the things. If you say, well, what do you do creatively? I used to do a lot of drawing and like booking too, like a lot of writing when I was probably in high school more than anything. Like I would rebook WWE stuff. I would do my own fantasy booking, like with my backyard promotion that I was running. Other than that, I don't know if it's creative. I love the game. So like any games that have your ability to create, like Super Mario Maker.
Okay, yeah.
Guy, so I make those levels, but that's about it at this point.
What's your favorite move or hold that you don't use?
Favorite move or hold that I don't use. I do. You mentioned it earlier, and I used to do this way back in the day when I was doing backyard wrestling. But I love the vertebreaker. I saw that move for the first time on it was like a mixtape I had on VHS from a Japanese promotion that did a lot of deathmatch stuff. And it was this deathmatch with, I forgot the two girls. One of them looked like a Bull Nakano. It was a really heavy set, like badass Japanese wrestler. And this little petite little Japanese girl. And it was like a barbed wire deathmatch. And I'm watching this thing, and the little one gets the big one into a vertebraker. And one that was just lifting up a woman that was like twice his size was incredible. But then that move, and this was like a high neck vertebraker.
Yeah.
So like it was basically head and, heels over. And I just like, I remember jumping out of my chair. I was just like, oh my God. So, I mean, that might be one of them, because every time I see that move, I think it's one of the coolest, most sickest looking moves ever. But it's super dangerous, and I pride myself on doing like finishing moves that I can do on anybody. So I try not to have moves in my repertoire that if I'm wrestling someone who's 300 pounds and I have trouble doing it, or if I'm tired and blown up and I can't do it. That's why like my finishing move for the longest time was the DDT. Big Jake Roberts fan, Arn Anderson fan. And now it's an elbow drop. So even if I'm wrestling a big guy, I can still do it, but probably the vertebraker.
Okay. Any crazy fan interactions you've had over the years?
So most recently, not that this was a crazy interaction, but it was an eye-opening one. I got a letter from a guy in Germany, and it came into my mailbox. So I opened my mail, and it said, Mr. Dutra, I'm a big fan of yours. Can you please take the attached photo, autograph it, and mail it back to this address, and I think he put it like, set it up to he's like, just, return to sender kind of thing, and I'll pay for the postage, something like that. And that's all fine. Like, he basically printed a photo that he found of me on Google and asked me to sign it. But what was alarming to me is how he got my home address.
Yeah.
So I started Googling my name and found out how easy it was to find someone's address. And immediately after that, I basically found a service that like wipes your public data from like all these sources. And so that was one. And then, I mean, I guess there was a guy I wrestled in Arizona a year ago, or about a year and a half ago. And this one guy, like, I don't know if he was just like off in a way, but he came up to me and he's like, I'm like such a big fan of yours. And he's like, this is my first time seeing you, and I'm such a big fan. I'm like, okay, cool. Yeah. Do you want a photo? We took a photo. And then the venue was across the parking lot from like a IHOP or something. So I go after the venue to an IHOP to go have dinner, and he follows me there. And then he sits at a table like 3 tables down. And then I'm about to like get my plate of food, and then he comes up and he sits down in the booth across from me and wants to have a conversation. And I'm like, hey, I really appreciate it, but can I just eat my meal for a minute? He's like, oh yeah, sure. And then like he watches until I finish my meal, and then he like right when I'm about to like get up, he goes, oh, can we talk and this and that. So I don't know, maybe that gave me a sense of what like maybe the superstars in wrestling all sort of get sometimes. I feel like I remember I went to WrestleMania in Chicago, and obviously I'm just a fan at that point. And I saw Sean Daivari. He was eating with, I think, probably his girlfriend or whatever it was. And I sort of did the same thing, meaning that like I was with my girlfriend, but I was like watching him going, okay, I don't want to interrupt him, but I do want to say something and maybe get a photo with him. So I'm going to wait until like he's completely off, like he's finished his food and whatnot. And I think he was probably intentionally keeping his head or his ear to the phone, and he just kept doing this the whole time, so no one would go up to him. But I remember walking up, and then like he just looked at me, and he turned back, and he went back to his phone. I'm like, all right, whatever. But so like when the guy did it to me like a year and a half ago, I'm sort of like, okay, I sort of get it now. Don't give people their space a little bit. But.
Yeah, I think that was the good thing about helping out at Big Time Wrestling when I was like 17, 18, 19. Because Kirk always brought in like big names. You know what I mean? Like I saw like Bret Hart and like a bunch of people there. So it's like I had to learn early not to fucking bug people. You know what I mean? So, and I carried that on with like, so when I went to go see an AEW, I went to see the pay-per-view Revolution, actually the last freaking live pay-per-view they had with actual fans. And on my way home, I flew back to Atlanta, and of course a lot of those guys go through there because it was on a Delta flight. And on my plane was like Kazarian, Luchasaurus, like a bunch of dudes. And I'm fucking like an idiot. I'm wearing like the AEW jacket that I bought at the event. So now I look like a super mark. I'm like, shit. And I can tell, like, as I'm at the waiting area, it's waiting to board the plane, they're already kind of like out of the corner of their eye, like, fuck.
Yeah, right.
So like the second like we make eye contact, I just immediately was just like, and I just kept walking, and they were like, okay. I can tell like the ease of like, fuck, I don't want to like
bother me.
Yeah, I don't want to perform right now. You know what I mean? Like they're like, it's like a 6 a.m. flight. So they're like, I don't want to talk to no one. Like, you know what I mean? And I'm like, dude, I'm not gonna bug you. That's it. I'm not gonna bug you. But yeah.
I will say the one more that was actually a pretty awesome one. So there was a show in 2010. It was at BFD. So they built a ring like just in the middle of the grass, like in between different concert stages. And all the people that are there are definitely not wrestling fans, but they're most definitely drunk. And sometimes those are the best fans to wrestle in front of. So at that point, I'm like as white meat, like cookie cutter looking baby face, young looking kid. I always like looked, I think, younger than I was. So even if I at that point was 26 years old, I think I looked like I was like 19 or 20. And there was like a flock of girls that obviously knew nothing about wrestling, but they saw this like young, good looking white guy, like clean cut, like shaven in Speedos. And they all like came over to me and we took this photo. And like one of them is like grabbing like around my waist. One of them is like licking my leg. Like they were just all over me. It was awesome. So I'll have to share that photo with you. It's a good one. So that's an awesome fan interaction.
Yeah, definitely. When you're working with somebody in a match, besides hurting you, what's the worst thing they could do in the ring with you?
I just think in any way, like I don't know, besides hurting you is like, I don't know, just like jeopardizing trust, if that makes sense. Often that's like in some form of like doing something that you didn't expect, which, leads to hurting someone. But I would say if it's something to where like we had arranged at some point to do something and they intentionally go, into business for themselves, that would be something that would probably be the worst thing you can do to someone. It doesn't always mean that you get hurt doing it, but it does mean that like, hey, we go into this with an understanding that business is business and we have to trust each other to ensure safety. And when you do something that was not discussed or arranged, that's sort of a break of that trust. And then at that point, it's very hard to do business in the future ever again. It's like, look, that's a serious deal. I don't know how I can trust my life, my well-being in the ring if we can't agree and you go rogue essentially.
Yeah. When's the last time you were legitimately surprised by another worker in the ring?
In what regard?
So I always like to say it's either like you didn't really know too much about him and you were just like, wow, like working with this guy is just so fluid, so crisp. Like I couldn't believe it.
I got an answer for you. It's Chris Bay. So Chris was primarily just a Las Vegas indie guy, working for Future Stars of Wrestling. And occasionally he'd come out and do Southern California stuff. And he worked his way up to Fresno for Best of the West, which is where I was working. He ended up being the champion there, and had a good string of matches. I think he worked Shane Strickland a lot in his last days in that area before he went off to NXT. But I hadn't heard much about him. I knew that he is starting to develop a name, but he'd only been in the business for no more than 2 years. Like, he was super young, and I mean, I guess you could say relatively green, right? But I knew that he was like making a name for himself, so he had to be talented. So then it would have been my second or third show with Best of the West. I got put up against Chris, and it was then that I asked him, like, so when did you start? And this, that, and he's like, oh, just about 2 years ago. And I'm like, oh, really? Okay. So I'm sort of expecting to call the match in the ring, and we get in there, and immediately he starts calling everything we discussed at the right times. You know, doesn't make it obvious. He's very fluid. He just was so natural. And then at the point, we just sort of realized we clicked without having to call things. And he would do extra things that like typically only tenured, like seasoned vets would do. Like, he would reiterate things and then say, you ready? Like I called it, but are you ready? Did you get it? Like, a lot of times, like when you're working with a young guy, you do that to the young guy, but he was doing that as habit, no matter who he works. And that's like a sign of someone who really understands how to work, understands the business, and just is super developed fast. So I got back there, and I remember telling him this. I said, you're going to be signed somewhere within a year. Like, you are incredibly good for where you are in this business. Oh, thank you. Appreciate that. And it was about a year later that he got the Impact deal. So I'm super proud of him. And he's like, the moment you clarified that question, I knew instantly who it was. So it'd definitely be Chris.
Yeah, I remember I saw him. I went to go see Luke wrestle at Ring Warriors in Vegas, which they had for like a few shows. But I saw Bay wrestle there, and I got a chance to meet him there. Super nice guy. But it tripped me out. Like, I looked him up afterward because I saw the same thing when he was in the ring. I was like, damn, this guy's got something. Yeah. And then when I found he was only like a couple of years in, I was like, what? Yeah, like, how's that possible?
Because I've seen so many guys that are similar in like size and style, like they're high flyers and stuff, and they've been in the business for 7-8 years. But they're just nowhere near as fluid or developed and can't call stuff on the fly like that. So,
has a booker tried to stiff you on money? And if so, what are some fun excuses they gave in doing so?
I think every wrestler can say at least at one point that they've been stiffed on money. The typical one is, hey, the draw wasn't really what we expected. Can I get you on the next show? Like, right now, the only way I could pay you is if, I ran to the bank and pulled whatever I have left out of savings. That particular instant, I was 1 year in the business. So I was like, oh, yeah, no problem. Just get me the next time, which never happened, right?
Yeah.
But at that very same show, there was another wrestler who obviously had been in the game for longer, was like, yeah, you know what? Go to the bank. I'll wait right here. Go pull it out of savings. I'll stay here. It's cool. All right. I can go to the bank with you. What do you prefer?
Yeah.
I'll go to the bank. I'll go to the bank. So yeah, I mean, yeah, it's happened. I will say it's very infrequent. Like, I'd say maybe twice ever. I'm trying to think of the other time. Sometimes, like, and this is, I think, oftentimes when you're younger and you sort of don't negotiate ahead of time what your fee is, it's like you're just taking whatever is expected. There was a time where half the roster pulled out of the show, and I won't get into details, but basically there were a group of people that I was traveling with that were there. And there was another group from another like school that were supposed to meet there. So we had a larger roster. They pulled out of the show same day, like hours before. So you would think, being that we had to work harder with a smaller roster, and he just freed up all that payout money, right?
Yeah.
That he would redistribute, but he ended up pocketing all that and stretched out the show with the talent he had and paid us the same. So you can go back and forth on whether or not that is stiffing someone, because technically it's not. But I think the best thing to do is try to split that profit. You could pocket some of it, right? Because you're not. But if you're making the guys work harder, effectively, cut them a little more, right? Especially since that one, I think we were traveling like 4 or 5 hours away from our home, so it's like what we were getting paid was basically covering our gas and food. So.
Yeah, you at least could do something just to hey, I appreciate that you guys had to put in a little extra work today. You know what I mean? So here, have some bonus. That's not that hard. But yeah, what's a mistake that you made in wrestling that now that you look back on it, it turns out it was the right thing to do?
It would probably be something along the lines of not speaking up about something that I felt like I was wronged on. And I was advised, no, I just don't say anything. I'm like, no, it needs to be said. But I think in hindsight, being that I was young into the business, that even though any outsider would feel like, yeah, I was in the right, it would be looked upon differently from the inside. And I wish I could give you like an answer with greater substance, but that's the first thing that would come to mind is like feeling like I should have spoken up about something and I didn't. And then, hindsight being like, you know what, it was probably good I kept my mouth shut because I could have got myself like blackballed or something like that,
Yeah. When you're working a lot of different promotions, you see a lot of different gimmick. What's the worst gimmick you've seen?
There was so at Cauliflower Alley in the early 2000s, or no, I'm sorry, the early 2010. I think it was 2009 or 2010 actually. Matt Carlos and I, as Polyester Express, got put into like a 6-person tag, and there was a guy who was, and I forgot his name, and I don't think he'd ever hear this come, but he basically was a bumblebee. So like, and it was not like, oh, it's like the killer bees and he's just wearing like a yellow and black colored. No, he was like an actual bumblebee.
Like he looked like the bee man from The Simpsons?
Yes, he looked like the bee man. And like his gimmick was to sting you. So like it would be like the flying hip attack with the stinger. So it would have been like a show. I mean, maybe this would have been good for I don't know. It would have been good for
like Chikara, DDT.
Chikara. That would have been this would have been a great Chikara gimmick, right? Maybe you can face off against the Colony or something. But it was for context for anyone who's ever been to Cauliflower Alley. It's a lot of old school wrestling legends. At least back then, they still had people go. And I remember there was a photo of Matt and I walking down the ring doing our disco dancing, and in the background is J.J. Dillon in the crowd. And because a lot of legends would go and watch these shows, and he had this face like this. It's like the best caption ever, because you could just tell he's like, this is the dumbest like bullshit mockery of professional wrestling I've ever seen. Because the match was Matt Carlos, myself, and Jekyll's the Jester. So a Jester and 2 disco guys. And it was against Captain Calico, who was like a luchador pirate, the Bumblebee, and gorgeous guy from Canada. I'm trying to think of his name. He did like sort of a Gorgeous George kind of gimmick. Michelle Starr. That was his name.
Okay.
So, yeah. So, and Michelle Starr's finishing move was basically an inverted camel clutch. So instead of sitting on the guy's back, grabbing their chin, you flip the guy over. So he was laying on his back and his face was facing your crotch. And he'd grab behind your head and just pull you into his crotch over and over. So it was like you tap out of being disgusted by being like a blowjob kind of thing. So
like almost like a seated Bronco Buster, like
exactly. But you pull the guy's head up into your crotch because that was his gimmick, right? It was like this like erotic homosexual deal, right? So you have J.J. Dillon there. and he's watching these disco guys, and there's Jester versus the pirate, the bumblebee, who's trying to sting him, and this guy who's doing a blowjob finisher, and he's
There's
so
just
disgusted.
there's just a dartboard of different, like, it's gonna be a disco and
right,
be a pirate,
and it's like that match could have worked on like a Chikara or maybe even like a Hood Slam kind of thing, right?
Yeah,
but it definitely wouldn't work for Cauliflower Alley, and that Bumblebee character was just bad to me. It was just like really bad.
When you're working indie shows, you're working with a lot of guys who are quote unquote names, guys that are in WWE, WCW, ECW, or just really big indies like, Ring of Honor, PWG, and that kind of stuff. Were there any of those guys that you worked at with the show, or just who were on the same show as you, that thought they were bigger than the show, acted like they were bigger than the show, just really rubbed you the wrong way? And you don't have to say any names if you don't want to bury anyone, but just like any kind of situations like that.
I mean, I think, yeah, there are guys, and I definitely won't name them. But there are guys that, and this is before, like, I felt like they made it. Like, there's a guy I know that was in NXT for a while, which I guess would be like the pinnacle of where he was at. But even before he was there, I think he felt like he was a big name on the indies. And it's like when you're just an established indie guy, and you put your stuff in a corner, like away from everybody else, you're either A, antisocial, or B, you're big-headed, or both maybe. But I always felt I appreciated people that were bigger than most of the guys in our locker room, whether they're established on the indies or WWE or some kind of big stage, that would actually go and mingle. So, I mean, there are always going to be guys who I think feel like they're too big for this place and they're just collecting a paycheck. But what I would rather focus on are the guys who know that they are bigger and they use that to help everybody else. MVP is excellent. So him, Matt Hardy, he had worked APW quite a few times, and MVP did as well. And I got a chance to wrestle MVP. This was like a year ago at Best of the West. Both of those guys, I mean, those guys have been on WrestleMania, right? So they've been as high as you can really go. They go into locker rooms and they talk to anybody. If you have a question, they welcome it. They will sit there. If you ask them, like, can you watch my match and give me some pointers? A lot of guys like, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, sure, I'll watch it, kid. And they don't watch it. Because I've not been part of it, but I've seen someone tell another guy, yeah, I'll watch your match. And the guy goes out there, and then the guy goes back to talking to whoever he was talking to. Kid comes back. What'd you think? Oh, overall, I thought it was pretty good. I don't got any feedback for you. And the kid thinks, oh, awesome. And didn't watch the match at all. Wow. But guys, like, I always put over Matt Hardy and MVP. They're the first two that come to mind. There's been a lot of them. Chris Masters, he was really great. He always helps out in that sense. So you think of anyone else at the top of my head, but I'd put those three there right there for now.
Well, I was talking the other day to someone about when we were at the PWI tryout and, Crash Holly was there, and like he had just gotten out of the WWE, like literally like just gotten out of the WWE. And he was basically there helping out, cause he knows Modest and Donovan really well. And he easily could have came and been very like, oh, hey, how's it going? Blah, blah, blah. And kind of just chilled and did nothing. And everyone would have appreciated him being there. But he was so like in depth with like every single person. He was taking notes on every person trying out. He was giving people pointers for stuff. Like I appreciated that so much when I saw it. Cause I was like, holy shit, like this dude like loves wrestling. Like that's how much he gives a shit.
Yeah, he was really great. And they also brought in, I don't know if you remember, they brought in Spike too.
Yeah.
And he was the same way. They actually, I think they had such strong friendships with anyone they brought to their school that likewise they returned the favor, and they were really good to the students and stuff too. So
I'm gonna go ahead and this is the last one to finish off on here. I call this the feel good question of the podcast. This is your pure joy in wrestling, whether it be something before, during, or after the match, something that gives you goosebumps. You get psyched when it happens. You're like, this is why I fucking love this business.
It would have to be the audience more than anything, because I get goosebumps when the audience reacts in a way that, you can't really like replicate. You know what I mean? They're like the UGWA I'll bring up because I wrestled there last year and they have a really hot crowd. When they start developing like unique chants just for you, I remember I was still growing my hair out for the Battle King, right? So at the time it was like that ugly halfway stage. So I had like a little paintbrush ponytail. And in fact, I think this match just aired, but basically midway through the match, I take a big bump and the ponytail comes loose and I feel around and I find the hair tie. So they start laughing about the hair thing, and the announcer is on a PA. So he actually comments on it and everyone starts laughing, right? And then I actually, in my hand, I stretch out the hair tie in front of everybody. And then I go like this and bring it all back and tie it back because they hate the ponytail. And it's like, F your ponytail. And it's like, that kind of stuff gives me like a high like no other, because you ultimately want to have that connection with the crowd. Any kind of a false finish where they react exactly how you want them to, like you want that big O and you really want them, you want to fool them. Those moments make it all worthwhile for me. Social media also now has been great. I mean, it's good and bad, right? You get the very best and the very worst of it. But when you get a lot of people that you've never even met before that, now see your stuff on some kind of a platform, and they take the time out of the day to like post something and go, wow, I don't know, I've never seen this guy before, but he was really great. Just like that kind of stuff. That goes a long way to make me feel like this is all worthwhile. So if I can make a connection with even just one person over the internet, over something I performed on, it's great. But more so than anything is definitely the live reactions from an audience when you're trying to control them up and down this roller coaster of emotions, and it hits every point exactly how you want. Like there's no better feeling in the world. And the wrestlers always talk about it. It's like that adrenaline, that dopamine hit, it's incredible.
Well, thank you, brother. I appreciate you being on the show. It's nice seeing you again after such a long time. Please, though, first, put yourself over. Where can people buy merch? Where can they see you on social media? All that stuff. And if you can, at the end, maybe give, if they're not too familiar with your work, maybe a couple matches they could look up on YouTube or something that you're proud of.
Yeah, sure. So on Facebook and on Instagram, you can find me at Battle King Dave Dutra. On Twitter, it's just at Dave Dutra because I secured that one early enough. You can get all my merchandise, which right now I have 2 brand new Battle King t-shirts on Pro Wrestling Tees. So that would be prowrestlingtees.com/Dave Dutra. I am working on getting more merchandise in the moment. So you'll have cool looking stickers, cartoon versions of the Battle King and stuff. But yeah, YouTube as well. So youtube.com/Dave Dutra. If you just search for me, you'll find a lot of the newest matches I have. There is a match with Jungle Boy that there's a full cut as well as a 5-minute cut that has most of the action sequences in there that I'm really proud of. There's a kid named Matt Fury that I wrestled 3 separate times in this like basically like year-long feud at the UGWA. I feel like that's some of my best stuff. It happened all last year. That's all real good. See if there's anything else. I'm really hard on my work. So like I always try to point people towards the newer stuff just because I feel like I'm always trying to improve and get better. But I would stick with that stuff first and foremost. The stuff with Matt Fury and Jungle Boy are really great. If you want an old match that I always feel is a classic, especially for how young and green we were, there's a match against Matt Carlos at ABW Christmas Chaos in 2010, I believe, which was for the internet title. That one, like, especially for being young kids, like I felt like we tore the house down. We got a standing ovation after that match. And we got an impromptu promo from the booker. Basically, he stood up out of his chair and immediately called for a rematch, which was not part of the show at all. But the match was so good, he's like, we're going to do this again in January. So that one's on my YouTube channel. Obviously, you have to go back a ways for that. And then any of my stuff with Jeff Cobb. I've wrestled Cobb like 5 or 6 times, and Cobb is amazing. Like, if you watch Jeff Cobb now, he's like even leagues better now than he was then, but Jeff was still an incredible wrestler even when I first wrestled him. So there's a couple matches on YouTube with Jeff too. If you want more recent stuff though, definitely like the Jungle Boy match, anything with the Matt Fury. Those are all awesome. So
awesome. Well, thank you very much for being on the show.
All right. I appreciate it, Paul. Thanks.